Good morning, everyone, and we will call this meeting to order. This is meeting number 11 of the Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security, Tuesday, November 15th, 2011. And this morning we begin our consideration of Bill C-19, an act to amend the Criminal Code and the Firearms Act. This morning we will be hearing from the Honourable Vic Taves, Minister of Public Safety. And before we proceed to the panel of witnesses in our second hour, I'll just remind our committee that we're going to just pause for about 5 minutes and do a little business on our ratifying our steering committee report, which will take just moments, and then we will move into the to our first panel of witnesses on this very important study that we begin this morning. Our committee welcomes the Minister for appearing this morning. We thank him in the past for appearing before our committee many times, and we certainly look forward to your presentation this morning, Mr. Minister, and we'll invite you to have your opening comments, and then we'll move into a number of rounds of questions. Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. My comments this morning will be relatively brief, and if there's no questions after that, I'll be out of here very quickly. I want to thank all of the honourable committee members for the invitation to appear here before you today to help with your deliberations on Bill C-19, ending the Long Gun Registry Act. And so if there are any committee members with some questions about where they stand on this bill, I'd be more than happy to answer those. For too long, law-abiding farmers, duck hunters, and sport shooters have been criminalized by the wasteful and ineffective long gun registry. Bill C-19 is fulfilling our government's long-standing commitment to scrap the failed boondoggle once and for all. For many years, it has been clear that the long gun registry does not work, does nothing to prevent crime or protect frontline officers. We have on record testimony after testimony by police officers who have told us in no uncertain terms that they do not trust the accuracy of the registry, and they openly question its value as a tool to protect police officers responding to a house call. These witnesses have provided eye-opening accounts of how truly flawed the registry is. One officer going as far as to say that he wouldn't risk the lives of his own staff based on the results of a registry search. That is very troubling, Mr. Chair. Furthermore, we know that the long gun registry has no ability to prevent crime. There's no evidence that it has stopped a single crime or saved a single life. It does not prevent anyone from using a firearm for violence, and it does not keep guns out of the hands of criminals. It is clear that on all fronts, it is a failure. Our government believes in measures that actually protect law-abiding Canadian families. As committee members are aware, we have taken decisive action to ensure that those who commit serious crimes face serious consequences. This includes putting in place tough punishment for gun-related crimes such as drive-by shootings and gang-related violence. It includes increasing the minimum penalties for specific offences involving firearms, including attempted murder, sexual assault, and kidnapping, among others. We have also introduced legislation that requires people charged with serious firearms offences to show to the court why they shouldn't be kept in jail while awaiting their trial. They will not benefit from a presumptive entitlement to bail. We believe that these amendments are starting to have a positive impact on homicide rates in this nation. The fact remains, however, that even one murder a year is too many, and we must continue to work hard to improve our laws and focus on the most effective measures to crack down on crime. It's telling that in a place like Winnipeg, which has the highest per capita murder rate in Canada, the NDP provincial government does not support the long gun registry, views it as a waste of time, a waste of resources, and are clearly on board with our government in respect to the amendments that we're bringing forward in C-10, which police officers admit would do a much better job of, in fact, focusing on criminals and preventing crime. It is our belief that laws should protect and not burden law-abiding citizens. That is why, with Bill C-19, we are moving to scrap the failed long gun registry once and for all. First of all, Bill C-19 will eliminate the requirement for firearms owners to register their long guns, in other words, their rifles and shotguns. The second part of Bill C-19 would see the destruction of all records related to the registration information of long guns in the Canadian Firearms Registry and under the control of the Chief Firearms Officers. This item has been the subject of much discussion since we tabled this legislation, but we have plainly stated that we will not share the personal and private information of more than 7 million Canadians who have registered their long guns. These, in simple terms, are the proposed changes to the Firearms Act and the Criminal Code. I'd like to take just a moment to mention what will not change under Bill C-19. What will not change, Mr. Chair, is the current and strict licensing system that is in place for controlling firearms. Firearms owners will still require a valid license to purchase or possess firearms and to purchase ammunition. They will still be required to undergo background checks, pass the Canadian Firearms Safety Course, and comply with firearms safe storage and transportation requirements. We believe this to be a reasonable requirement for those who want to legally acquire and use firearms. Moreover, owners of restricted and prohibited firearms will still be required to register their firearms with the RCMP. We believe that this is the most effective measure of control regarding restricted and prohibited firearms such as handguns. And as committee members may be aware, handguns are the firearm of choice in homicide crimes in Canada. It's time to stop burdening legal long gun owners with red tape, because when you step back and think about it, the Long Gun Registry isn't actually targeting criminals. Rather, it targets the law-abiding Canadians who own long guns and who have to jump through the bureaucratic hoops to register a rifle or shotgun for which they already have a legal license. It's an unfair burden, Mr. Chair, and it does nothing to stop criminals from using illegal or smuggled handguns to commit violent crimes in our community. In closing, Mr. Chair, I would urge all committee members to take into account and the thoughtful consideration of the important amendments we are proposing with this bill. After a legacy of waste that has lasted almost 17 years, it is time to swiftly and decisively end the Long Gun Registry once and for all. Thank you, and if there are questions, I will take them now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister, and we'll move into the first round of questioning from Ms. Hepner, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank you very much, Minister Taves, for being here today. I also want to thank you personally for your support through the last several years on my efforts and the efforts of so many of our caucus to end the Long Gun Registry. Thank you so much for that. I want to ask you, both my bill, C-391 and C-19, are both very straightforward bills that just end the requirements for individuals and businesses to register non-restricted, non-prohibited firearms. I was concerned this morning when I read media reports of an analysis done by officials, and a certain official, in his opinion, thought that both C-391 and C-19 could have a number of unintended consequences, and in this person's opinion, specifically related to the trafficking of firearms, specifically at the border. I was very concerned with this report. Is this accurate, and can you please comment on this official's opinion?
Well, thank you. I in fact, also had a chance to take a look at that article. In fact, I wasn't familiar with the memorandum that an official in my department, in fact, had prepared for, I assume, internal purposes. But in looking at the memorandum, it's clear that the analysis presented by this official is factually flawed. It's incorrect. I've asked my deputy minister to look into the matter. Contrary to the suggestion made in the analysis, neither Bill C-19 or previous Bill C-391 remove any controls on the import of firearms. As you know, in fact, we have increased penalties for the importation of firearms illegally. And I can just state that Canadians gave our government a strong mandate to end this wasteful, this ineffective long gun registry once and for all. That's exactly what we're doing. We're not getting into the areas that this memorandum suggested that we might get into. And I think that's the way the memorandum is phrased, that if we did something else, the repercussions would be something else. But we're not going down that road.
Okay, so just to be clear again, then C-19 actually doesn't touch or have any there are no changes made to the way our border officials are able to monitor, track, stop legal guns from coming into the country, obviously illegal guns.
The analysis of whether or not something is a restricted or prohibited or non-restricted firearms got nothing to do with the registry. That's an analysis that the officers make at the border and elsewhere throughout the country. Tying that to C-19 is a bit of a red herring, and as I said, the analysis is quite flawed.
Thank you for clarifying that. I'm sure that will be clarified in future media reports as well. Another question.
Don't bet on it.
Oh. I also want to ask you about something that's been discussed a lot. My bill did not explicitly contain the provision of destroying of all of the data. I know that when I was always asked about are we going to destroy the data, my answer was, well, we're ending the long gun registry, so of course we're going to end the data. You've been criticized, our government has been criticized for explicitly saying we will destroy the data contained in the long gun registry. Can you please explain how the long gun registry is not just an idea or a concept or something that happens in the future? It actually is the data. Can you please explain why we're destroying the data and how it is the long gun registry?
Well, I don't know how much clearer I can be. The suggestion, and I think it's an artificial distinction without a difference, that somehow the registry is separate from the data. The registry is the data. Without the data, there is no registry. And so when our government and our party made the very clear commitment that we would scrap the long gun registry, that we would end it, implicit, indeed explicit in that, is that we are destroying the information that has been collected under the authority of that legislation. There's simply no other answer for that. It's disingenuous to say to Canadians, you know, I thought that when they're going to end the registry, they're actually going to keep the information. I think that if any politician would have made that claim on the campaign trail, they would have been thoroughly discredited. This is a revisionist type of excuse that some are making in order to try and justify flipping their position on the registry.
How much time do I have? We've been told that the data is extremely flawed, and we're going to be hearing testimony later on today from frontline officers who will tell us that they have great concerns with the data. Can you talk a little bit about your understanding of how accurate it is, what, in terms of how many long guns are actually in the country opposed to how many are contained in the registry, as well as the information? Can you talk a bit about the accuracy of the data as it is right now?
Well, I can only agree that the information is quite inaccurate, and indeed the premise that the former government made in terms of the numbers of long guns in the country, you'll notice over the years they kept on reducing how many long guns there were actually in the country in order to show that the compliance rate was growing higher and higher. So if you say at one point there's 14 million long guns and you have only 1 million registered, you obviously have a low compliance rate. But if you lower the number of long guns, which you saw the former government doing consistently, and I don't know what number they eventually landed up, but they could then show a much higher compliance rate. So it doesn't give you any indication of how many long guns there are actually in this country. But what we can say with accuracy is that when we license individuals, we know those individuals are licensed owners, and they are the ones who are qualified to own and use firearms. That is a much better system, a much better tool, much more accurate than the long gun registry, which, of course, we know is not utilized by criminals. Having said that, criminals don't license themselves either. But I think the licensing is a much better screener of individuals who may, for various reasons, want a firearm, but because of perhaps a medical condition or others, should not own a firearm. So we can have that discussion, I think, in a very appropriate way through the licensing process. The registry doesn't assist in that respect.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister, and we'll now move into the official opposition. Mr. Harris, welcome here.
Thank you, Chair, and I want to thank the Minister for coming to the meeting today. And I want to ask you, first of all, Minister, why it is that, we've heard from you and your government consistently over the past several years of your concern about victims and the importance of the position of victims in this country. Now, even allowing for a certain amount of hyperbole, you tell us that the opposition could care less about victims and they're really more interested in helping criminals, etc., etc. But this has been the general tone of some of your comments. But I want to ask you about why is it you don't listen to victims when it comes to the protections that they're seeking from that is received and they believe is received by a strict control on and registration of non-prohibited and non-restricted weapons, such as the long guns you talk about, but also other semi-automatics and other guns. And I'm speaking here of Sue O'Sullivan, the Federal Victims Ombudsman, who says the majority of victims groups we have spoken with continue to support keeping the long gun registry. The victims of the Polytechnique in Montreal, including individual survivors and their families, who are strongly supportive of strong gun control, including the ability to track guns and the registration of guns. The Dawson College victims. We have Priscilla DeVeers, a well-known gun violence activist whose daughter, Nicole, was abducted and killed with an unrestricted, legally owned rifle in 1991, who's very concerned about a gun control law, including registration, and rigorously implemented, making it harder for dangerous people to get firearms, for firearms to fall into the wrong hands. We have recently, today, the Elizabeth Pousaladis, who appeared here as president of the Association of Families of Victims of Assassinated and Disappeared, who appeared last week to the Justice Committee supporting certain aspects of Bill C-10, but is also adamantly in favor of a long gun registry. So why aren't you listening to victims, those kinds of victims who say that they are concerned and fearful of an unrestricted and unregulated system, and why aren't you adopting instead some of the approaches suggested by the NDP in terms of achieving balance with the one-time no-fee registration forever? It's not a massive red tape situation as you've suggested. Why aren't you trying to achieve some balance in this and to ensure the safety of Canadians as victims of gun violence and victims of domestic violence and victims of others, and the chiefs of police, of course, have stated as a useful tool? Why aren't you trying to fix it? Why aren't you trying to improve it? Why aren't you listening to victims?
Harris, Mr. Minister.
Let's first of all look at your preamble to the question and the question itself. You'll notice, whether it's deliberate or not, a mixing of terms. You talk about gun control and registry interchangeably. You talk about, unrestricted in gun control. And it depends on what type of a question you ask to victims groups. If you were to say to victims groups, do you believe in gun control? They obviously all believe in gun control. I believe in gun control. I believe in effective gun control. And I listen to the victims who have indicated to me what is the best way of achieving an appropriate gun control system. But you're confusing, and again, deliberately or not, the registry and gun control. For example, I see gun control as including the reverse onus on bail applications when individuals are caught with an illegal firearm in downtown Surrey or Vancouver. They're caught with an illegal firearm. The onus now is shifted onto them to demonstrate why they should get bail as opposed to the Crown doing it. That's a much more effective version of gun control than the registry itself. The fact that individuals who now smuggle firearms into the country are met with a much more serious penal sanction is a much more effective gun control measure than a registry, which again does nothing to prevent the illegal acquisition of firearms, whether they're smuggled into the country, as many of them are, especially the handguns, or a registry. So I've listened very carefully, very closely. I've worked together with provincial governments. Your colleagues in the NDP government in Manitoba have clearly indicated this is not an effective gun control measure. They oppose the long gun registry, have specifically instructed their conservation officers not to enforce the registry, have specifically instructed the RCMP in those ridings in that province that these are not effective mechanisms in order to focus on the crime situation that they're facing.
Yeah, Mr. Toews, you're the Minister of Public Safety, and we have the National Police Force, the RCMP, saying in a report last February, firearms registration is a critical component of the entire firearms program, and talks about it as an important tool for law enforcement. In fact, as I'm sure you're aware, one of the particular aspects of firearms registration is the ability to trace firearms, and the unfortunate and a tragic loss of 4 RCMP officers in Mayerthorpe, Alberta, occurred, which was devastating to them and to everybody who was aware of this. But the guns themselves that were used in that were actually traced and led to the capture and conviction of 2 individuals, basically through the firearms registry. And police chiefs tell me, and the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police talk about the registry and the tracing element as an important investigative tool, as well as a tool that they would use if, say, someone, as you suggest, might be incapable of carrying guns because of mental disabilities or because they have a court order prohibiting them. The police officials have the ability to go and find the guns because they are required to be registered, know what guns are available, can trace guns, and all of the other associated investigative work. So why, as Minister of Public Safety, why are you discounting that when it has been used, in fact, to prosecute people who killed Mounties?
Okay, very, very quick. We're 20 seconds over already on the NDP's question. Quick answer, please.
Let me just then very quickly state and quote the Canadian Police Association, who say, "We're quite satisfied with the efforts that this government has made to work on behalf of frontline police officers, especially with respect to comprehensive justice legislation that has been a priority since the last election. We're working on issues and legislation that actually works as opposed to that which does not."
Thank you, Mr. Minister. We'll move to the second questioner, Mr. Rathgaber, please. 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, for your attendance here today and for your good work on this bill and other bills. I always shake my head in disbelief when my friends on the opposite side of the table raise Mayerthorpe as somehow a success of the long gun registry, because although it is true that there was a weapon that was traced to the grandfather of an individual who was subsequently convicted of aiding and abetting 4 homicides through a very elaborate Mr. Big Sting, which was likely the real cause of that conviction, but that's a debate for another day. But the reality is that the long gun registry did nothing to save the lives of 4 brave mounted police on that March morning in Mayerthorpe, Alberta. But my friend Mr. Harris also, in his premise to his question, referred to your preference for a so-called unregulated system. And there's much confusion. and I suspect deliberately, from the opponents of this legislation, the people that support the long gun registry, between the whole issue of licensing and registration. And as you know, Mr. Minister, I come from Alberta, and in Western Canada, perhaps support for the long gun registry is the least as you'll find anywhere else in Canada. But even in my province, some media sources, some bloggers and others have envisioned people walking down the street of Edmonton with concealed weapons or with rifles, shooting them up in the air as sort of a Wild West scenario. And I know, and I think you know, that nothing could be further from the truth. So I was wondering, for the people that are watching at home, could you once again clarify the issues between registration and licensing?
Well, thank you, and I'm glad you as well caught that seemingly careless use of what are very important terms in the control of firearms. The licensing is one aspect. The gun registry is a different issue altogether. Every individual, before they can acquire a firearm, whether it's restricted or non-restricted, must obtain a license. And you go through the testing process, and then there are other applications that you have to make, and your background is checked in order to ensure that we can, as humanly possible, weed out those who should not have firearms for one reason or another. And I think those reasons are clear, and I don't need to go into that. The gun registry does nothing to do with that. The gun registry is after the fact of somebody has got a license already and they register that firearm, or in fact they don't register the firearm at all, and they don't use the licensing provisions either. And most of the homicides are of that category. Individuals who are using handguns illegally and are causing the concern that many citizens feel. And my wish is that we would have a clear discussion on, in fact, the tremendous steps that we have taken as a government in terms of gun control, that is actually controlling guns from coming into the hands of criminals or those who are otherwise unfit to own a firearm. And that's disappointing that for political purposes it appears that the distinction between the various components of gun control on the one hand and the registry on the other are blurred. And that does nothing to forward a proper discussion about what are the most effective mechanisms for ensuring that gun crime is reduced.
And just for further clarification, C-19 does nothing to affect the licensing provisions that are currently in place?
No, it does nothing to affect the licensing provision, and as I indicated on this memo, which was produced for a newspaper, I guess, in the last day or so, perhaps in anticipation that I would be here at committee, I look at a memo like this, and even the memo is based on pretty inaccurate assumptions that somehow the jobs of CBSA officers at the border is going to be changed by C-19. The job remains exactly the same. If you came across the border and you had a firearm, you would have to have a license for it, whether it's registered or not. The registry has no impact on that scenario. And unfortunately, it's, again, a misleading discussion paper that, as I say, I only saw until this morning.
Sure. Mr. Harris also talked about the Police Association's support for the registry, or at least we anticipate, based on Ms. Hepner's bill and other attempts to get rid of this boondoggle. I'm always perplexed when we talk to frontline officers, and as you know, I sat on this committee when C-391 was here just over a year ago, and frontline officers will tell you that they cannot rely on the registry. It doesn't matter what situation they go to, they always have to assume the worst. They have to assume that there's firearms in that residence or in that vehicle, and they have to be prepared. And if they're not prepared for the existence of firearms, they do so at their own peril. Why do you think that there's the police association takes a contrary view when frontline officers invariably tell us that they cannot and will not rely on the accuracy of the long gun registry?
Well, your experience is the same as mine. I've never met a police officer who has seen the registry data come up in his patrol car and indicated there's no firearm associated with this individual, that he will now approach the car as though there were no firearm in that car. Simply foolish. No one would put their own life at risk by relying on the registry, or in fact put the life of their partner or a civilian at risk by doing that. Simply foolish. Same way that you don't go into a domestic situation where there's been a domestic disturbance and say, well, we're pretty safe here because there's no firearm license or registry here. Whether there's a license or a registry is quite irrelevant. You go into a home expecting a firearm. That's the prudent and the proper thing to do for any officer. I met with officers on a daily basis when they talk to me about the issue, and one of the things that has been pointed out to me, that what the long gun registry in fact has done is created a division between law officers on the one side and ordinary law-abiding Canadian citizens who may own firearms. And there's a mistrust of police officers because somehow they feel that they're out to get their guns. And it's really unfortunate, because most of these people are exactly the kind of people who should be assisting the police in investigations into crime, and yet now this long gun registry has created a barrier between police and law-abiding citizens, and that should never be the intent or the result of law.
Thank you very much, Minister. We'll now move to Mr. Scarpaleggia. Mr. Scarpaleggia,
yes.
You have 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. A few weeks ago, the RCMP recalled 50 long guns that it had allowed into Canada as non-restricted weapons, only to change its mind after the fact, reclassify them as restricted, and then send letters to the 50 people who bought those guns that were later reclassified. Without the registry, how would the police know where to address those letters? And are you saying that from this point on, it is absolutely impossible that the RCMP could make an error, could decide after the fact to change the classification of a long gun? In other words, could second guess its original decision? Are you saying that that is impossible from now on?
No.
So how would the RCMP contact people who bought guns that were allowed into the country as non-restricted weapons, but then wanted to recall those weapons because after the fact it realized that they could be converted into more dangerous weapons and wanted those guns back? How could it do that without the addresses of the gun owners that are in the gun registry?
They can still do that through the records of the shop that sold the firearms, the importer, to who that gun was sent to. In the case that you're mentioning, most of those guns would probably not have even been sold in that brief period of time. The gun owners, the gun shops, in fact, keep records of their sales, and those records can be accessed through warrant or other appropriate provisions. You don't need the registry for that.
So you're saying the shop owners now are the ones keeping the gun registry?
No. They keep records on their own. They do that for various purposes, including Income Tax Act, but the access to that is through an appropriate legal search warrant.
After the Dawson shooting, the police seized a weapon from someone they thought could be a copycat and commit the same horrible crime. They seized the weapon, which means that there was a possibility that that person would have would have killed someone with it. It's not a certainty, but it's a possibility. How can you make the categorical statement, the sweeping statement, that the registry over the course of 10 years has not possibly, even possibly, saved one life, when the police went and got a gun from a possible copycat? How can you make such a sweeping statement? I know it's very hard to come up with anecdotal, 100% certain evidence that a life has been saved. I mean, I could say that I'm not here today because of the 100 kilometer an hour speed limit. I mean, I could say there's no proof that the 100 kilometer an hour speed limit has saved my life, but we know that in the aggregate, the speed limit does save lives. So how can you make such categorical sweeping statements?
Well, I'm not familiar with the case that you mentioned. I don't see how the police were alerted of the fact that this individual would be a dangerous person through the registry. That doesn't even make any sense.
Okay, well, let me ask you another question. How many firearms licenses have been repealed in the last 5-10 years? Thousands, hundreds?
I could get those figures for you through a figure.
You came to committee without those figures? That's a very important piece of information.
Well,
because the question becomes, if you're repealing licenses, it means you think that person is dangerous with a gun.
We're not repealing licenses. I don't know why you get that. We're not appealing licenses.
The government has never repealed a gun owner's license.
Nothing in this legislation affects the process of repealing licenses.
But have you ever repealed a gun license because you feel that someone is no longer fit to own a gun? And if you have,
I have never.
If your department has ever done that, wouldn't it want to get its hands on the guns that that person whose license was repealed owned? And how could it do that without the gun registry?
They were doing that long before the gun registry.
Now, it seems to me, Mr. Chair, that without a registry, you have no idea how many guns that person owns. So the registry, even if you were doing it before, the registry gives you some added information about what you're looking for.
Well, let's. How many guns are there in Canada now that we have the registry? How many guns are there?
I'll be asking the questions, Minister. Well, I'd like to ask you how many gun licenses have been revoked.
Just let the Minister finish.
That's the problem. You have no idea. Your predecessor ministers in the Liberal Party kept on reducing the number of long guns in this country because they had no idea how many long guns there were. And so they reduced it very deliberately in order to show, now we've got a 30% compliance rate, or now a 40% compliance rate.
No information. You're saying that no information.
Wait.
You're saying that no information is better than imperfect information. I think that describes the ideology of this government on many issues, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Scarpelleggi, your time is almost up. You have a little time left, so you have a choice of whether you want to use it or allow the minister, but we can't
now, I would like to say that,
at the same time.
The minister must know that the demographic of gun ownership is changing. We all know that farmers need to have guns to run their farms, to kill gophers and animals that are impeding the growth of their crops, and no one has any problem with rural hunters passing on time-honored traditions to their children. But the demographics of gun ownership is changing. People now are not necessarily rural; they're urban people buying knockoffs of weapons they see in video games and in movies like Call of Duty. So, how much do we know about that new demographic?
Well, what I can say is that this bill has nothing to do with the classification of firearms.
Thank you very much. Our time is up, and I'll just remind committee members just to bring your question through the chair, and likewise with the answer, we'll bring the answer through the chair back to the member, and we'll now move to Madame Boivin. Vous avez 5 minutes, Madame.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm sure that those who are listening to us, particularly victims, and I'm thinking of the victims today. Minister, you talked about public safety and how the registry set up under the Liberals at a great price. I will agree with that. But you said that it has created a division between police and hunters. The Conservative government has opposed this registry even before they formed the government. Unfortunately, I think that the victims and the government, police forces and hunters are being opposed one to another. So normally we work together. We work together to have more security. Your government says this every day. The victims also want more security. They want to feel that they are safe, and that's how they viewed the registry. Now, hunters who don't want to pay the cost of the registry, they feel that they are being criminalized. I don't think that was anyone's intention, but they do want to carry out their work. And this is a tool which may be seen as being less than perfect. Well, we could work to improve it, and we hear from the Conservatives, of course, that that it is to the disadvantage of law-abiding hunters and citizens of Canada. But instead, if we were able to improve the registry, there are various police associations for or against, but your priority, your number one priority is to ensure public security and to make the Canadian people feel that they are safe. And I'm sure we've all received email from Ms. Thibault, who survived the Polytechnical massacre, and she has begged us not to eliminate this firearm registry so that these people won't feel that they have suffered and gone through all this for nothing. So we talk about unrestricted firearms and HS-50 and SH-115 Ruger. We're not talking about hunting rifles here. We're not talking about someone who's going out to hunt moose or deer. We're talking about firearms which have dangerous uses. And in the previous bill, there were measures for verifying permits or licenses, but we don't see a requirement here for verifying licenses. In this case, the verification is optional. And how can we go back to our ridings and tell people that by adopting C-19 that we are going to be any safer?
The problem that the member illustrates is that she is concerned that people feel that they are safe. We're not only concerned about feeling that they're safe, we're actually concerned about that they are safe. And that, I think, is a distinction between the NDP and my government. We actually take measures that increase public safety. That will result in people feeling safe, not simply saying we're going to do something that is ineffective, that is wasteful in terms of money, because we think you might feel safe. That's irresponsible to go down that road. There are many more cost-effective measures that we can take in order to ensure that crime is reduced, and we are taking those. I've mentioned some of those in my speech and in my opening remarks, and we are committed to doing that, including in C-10. Again, the member talks about the issue of the classification. This has nothing to do with the classification of firearms. This has got to do with the registry of non-restricted firearms. If the member has a concern about classification, if a firearm should be restricted or prohibited rather than unrestricted, that's another issue, and she should address that in legislation or a motion or elsewhere. But again, this has got nothing to do with the classification. And you see, Mr. Chair, what the NDP is trying to do: confuse the issues of registration, licensing, classification, and jumble it all up to make people feel safe. Well, we're much more concerned about that. The other last thing is the issue about license verification. This has got nothing to do with licensing, and I don't know how many times I can say that, Mr. Chair. This has got to do with non-restricted firearms, which would then be owned by people who are licensed.
Madam,
Merci.
30 seconds, please.
D'accord. Dans ce contexte,
Well, you are talking a lot about confusion in the debate. You are talking about working with the provinces. Well, the province of Quebec said very clearly that it wanted the data from the registry. You want to destroy it. But if a province wants to use the data from the registry, why refuse them this tool?
Orlock, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to the witness, thank you for coming. Minister, there were so many questions that I wanted to ask, but I do want to perhaps assist my Liberal friend that it is the police who actually instigate Section 100 orders. In other words, when they find
of the license.
Yeah, when they find a person who shouldn't own a firearm, they can make an application before the court. And to suggest that a minister of the Crown who comes before any committee and doesn't have every statistic that's available in their department, I think is, well, I'll just leave it as it is. Wouldn't you agree with me, Minister, that the real filter, the real ability of the state to make sure that only people who should own licensed, who own firearms, that they be put through a process, and we already have that process, to make sure that they're not mentally ill, to make sure that they're not spousal abusers, to make sure that they don't have a violent criminal background. And that would be my first question: is does this revocation of the firearms registry have any effect on that? The other question, Mr. Minister, is when you were talking to us about giving the police the tools to do their job, would you not agree that most police officers agreed with our government, or police officers lobbied our government to hire more police officers, both provincial and municipal, as well as RCMP? And I'd like to talk about, did the government deliver on that? Also, with regard to the registry in and of itself and its accuracy, I can tell you, Minister, shortly after being elected, I had a constituent come to me with an envelope, and they had registered their firearm. Attached to that, a page stuck to that, attached to it, was and I represent a riding in Ontario, was someone who registered 2 firearms from the province of Quebec, and they had all the person's personal information there, and doesn't that lead to how inaccurate the firearms registry is, and why would we want to perpetrate an inaccurate registry, give that inaccurate information to a province for them to instigate something that doesn't work anyway? I wonder if you could make comment on those questions, Mr. Minister.
Well, all very good questions. First of all, of course, I agree. It's important not to confuse licensing with registration. It's the same way that we should not confuse gun control generally with the issue of registration. And you'll see the proponents of the registry talking usually about gun control and trying to use studies from gun control matters generally on licensing and the like, and sort of attribute those characteristics to the registry when they're quite frankly not attributable. Secondly, our government took huge steps in hiring and facilitating the hiring of police officers by local jurisdictions, provinces, and municipalities. That was a commitment that our government made, and we delivered on that commitment. But it was not only in the context of provincial and municipal police forces, but it was in the context of the RCMP, which of course then has that impact on many provinces who choose to have the RCMP as their provincial police force or municipal police forces. Back in 1998, the former Liberal government, when I was the Attorney General of Manitoba, shut down Depot, shut down the training of RCMP officers in this country, at a time when, within 5 years, half of the RCMP officers would be eligible for retirement. It was one of the most foolish things that could have ever been done and put us into huge problems in terms of actually going after the bad guys and getting criminals. They shut down the police training. And so when we came into government, on average, we were only producing 300 officers out of Depot every year. 300. I think to make a break-even point has got to be around 1,000. We ramped that up to 1,800 in the first year. 1,800 officers out the first year because of the neglect of the prior government in terms of actually getting police officers. The thing they did was stress things like the gun registry and said, oh, the gun registry is going to protect, it's going to make them feel safe, as the NDP said, but neglect to actually put officers out on the street. And so our government has consistently now put out many troops through Depot, and we've encouraged provincial and municipal governments to hire more officers as well in order to meet the true criminal safety needs of Canadians.
Thank you, Minister. And we'll now move back to the official opposition, and we'll go to Mr. Harris, please. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Tays, you know, I've heard you say in the House, for example, that you have no issue with, this is not about changes that are going to affect the categorization of arms, but nevertheless, some of the consequences of your bill I find frankly irresponsible. The straight-up destruction of the registry and destruction of the data, first of all, doing the destruction of the data when the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police say they want it, and provincial governments like Quebec want it, in the interests of public safety, and they have an important role to play in that, the Chiefs of Police across this country. You are also weakening the international obligations on tracing. That is also necessary for our own public safety, and the Chiefs of Police have pointed that out. Thirdly, you are weakening the transfer requirements, and that's what my colleague, Madame Boivin, was getting at. The licensing verification requirements for transfer are therefore allowing guns to fall into the wrong hands. This is Clause 11 of the bill. But importantly, you're also ignoring the consequences of no longer having merchants being required to keep track of the guns they're selling, who they're selling them to, serial numbers and all of that, which was in place before the registry took place, but by destroying the registry, you're not putting back that requirement. You were going to be allowing semi-automatics, such as the Ruger Mini 14. We're going to be allowing sniper rifles. We even have a sawed-off shotgun for sale. It's manufactured as a sawed-off shotgun, so it's not illegal, with a 12.5-inch barrel. Is actually marketed as the outlaw shotgun, double barrel 12-gauge shotgun on sale in this country for $325. These will now be they were not restricted weapons. They're not prohibited weapons, and they will not be required to be registered or tracked in any way. That, sir, is irresponsible, and I'd like you to respond to those comments.
Mr. Harris, Mr. Minister, please.
All I can say is that if you have concerns about firearms that should be restricted and are not, that is outside of the context of this bill. This bill does not change the classification system. I don't know about all of the firearms that you're talking about, but that is something that the experts do in terms of the classification of the firearms. If you think that there is a problem with that classification, we can have that discussion. But it's got nothing to do with Bill C-19, and we shouldn't confuse the registry and the classification of firearms.
They're now required to be registered.
Well, if the issue, though, of the registry is if that's what the question is, we've made our position very clear on the ineffectiveness of the registry. But we're not changing the classification of that firearm, nor the necessity for obtaining a license in order to possess that firearm.
Very quickly, you complained about the inaccuracy of the registry, yet you've had an amnesty in place for a number of years, and therefore the records are obviously incomplete. You've also discouraged, through your political activity, people taking seriously the need for gun control. So it's not a surprise that the registry would be not complete. So that's your fault. You have to take responsibility for that.
Well, all I can say is that that we made our position clear on the registry. There were certain amnesties that were put in place, and at least you're being frank with the committee, admitting that not only is the registry incomplete, it's inaccurate.
Thank you, Minister. We'll now move to the last question of the day, and we'll go back to Ms. Hepner. 5 minutes.
Very much. I'm quite surprised at the lack of understanding by the opposition members of the Canadian Firearms Program, the classification of firearms. If you saw off a shotgun, it becomes an illegal weapon immediately. If you change a semi-automatic firearm into an automatic firearm, it becomes a prohibited restrictive firearm automatically. The long gun registry has nothing to do with registering. The long gun registry is talking about non-restricted, non-prohibited firearms. Mr. Scarpellegia talked about licensing, and when an individual has their license revoked, police officers are able to go in and apprehend the firearms that are at this individual's home. Again, if two individuals have a license to own firearms, the registered firearms can be transported between both places. So police officers could go out to a home where there are 5 firearms registered, and those firearms may not legally be stored at that individual's home. That's why police officers are telling us, and they will tell us very quickly in the next hour, that when they go to someone's home, they don't look at the registry and say, well, there are 2 guns, so we'll go apprehend those 2 guns from this individual whose license was revoked, and then we know we're clear. No, they sweep the home, and they make sure that all weapons, all firearms are accounted for. I'm wondering, Minister, if you can talk a little bit again about what frontline officers are doing when it comes to gun crime, what they're telling you when you meet with them. We do have 11 police officers in our own caucus. Can you tell us what they are actually doing when it comes to fighting crime and what they're asking us for? Because the registry is not helping them, and it's because it's inaccurate, they can't count on it, and the way the system is set up, firearms can be stored at different locations.
Well, thank you. The point that you make is a good one in terms of the presence of 11 police officers in our own caucus. It's not a coincidence that police officers, generally speaking, support our political party because of the effective measures that we take in terms of crime control and indeed in terms of gun control. This is a caucus of 11 that I consult with regularly because they are the experts. They have that background, and they have their ear to the ground in ways that I simply cannot be involved in at that local level. I hear on a regular basis from law enforcement officers supporting very strongly the legislative initiatives that we have taken. They are very supportive of that. And again, C-10, one of the police officers, the police chiefs, very supportive of that legislation and are just frustrated that for years, this legislation has been stalled in the House of Commons because prior to the last election, the opposition parties, the Liberals and New Democrats, consistently found ways to thwart the passage of legislation that would, in practice, not just feeling safe, but in practice, make people safe.
Thank you very much. That's all.
You have another minute.
That's all I have. Thank you.
All right. Was anyone else wanting just to conclude on that minute that she has left? I think our time is coming close to an end. Ms. Young, just summary comment very quickly.
Mr. Minister, thank you for coming here today and being very clear about the differences between classification, licensing, and the long gun registry, which is C-19. I'm from the city of Vancouver, and as you know, we've had several drive-by shootings, in fact, in my own riding. And so, is it true then, or in your experience, can you tell me whether criminals, in fact, register their guns?
Well, that hasn't been the practice. Not only don't they register their guns, they rarely are licensed gun owners. And but I think that the licensing can be justified in terms of qualifying people, and it's certainly a very serious offense to have a firearm without a license.
So therefore, the registry does not, in fact, prevent people from being shot.
No, it doesn't, because those are issues that are far removed from the registry. The last thing a young gang member is thinking about is whether or not a firearm is registered when he acquires it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Minister, for coming and for highlighting some of the parts of C-19, and this committee looks forward to continuing this study and to reporting back to the House. So thank you very much for your attendance here today. We are going to suspend just momentarily. I would remind the committee, actually, if the committee would just stay here, we'll just suspend momentarily, but we do want to ratify the steering committee report that is before you right now. And if you have that, we'll have the other witnesses that are going to appear. They can prepare to come to the table up here. Your committee met on the week before break week, the steering committee, and we came up with the report that you see before us here today. I'll just quickly go through it. That the committee allocate 5 meetings to the consideration of Bill C-19, an act to amend the Criminal Code Firearms Act, including its clause by clause. Also, because the minister was to appear that day, if the committee remembers, we had votes that day. The minister was unable to appear. He is here today. He was here today because of that, so that's taken up in the next part of the report. And that the committee deduce the evidence from the consideration of Bill C-391, an act to amend the Criminal Code and Firearms Act, repeal of long gun registry, heard in the 3rd session of the 40th Parliament, because in the last Parliament, a short Parliament, we had done a lot of this work, that be referenced there as well. So, Mr. Garrison.
Chair, I want to say again that with regard to the 5 sessions, the NDP believes this is inadequate for dealing with this. And I know the other side says this bill has been dealt with many times. It's not the same bill. There are things in this bill that were not in the previous bill, such as destruction of data. There are serious omissions in the bill, no provision for restoring business tracking and license verification. And there are a very large number of witnesses who would very much like to appear before this committee. And as I always remind the committee, nearly a third of the members of this House are new and have not had a chance to have the full benefit of those kinds of things. So we still do believe that 5 sessions will be inadequate, will not do justice to this bill, and we will be voting against this.
All right, Ms. Hepner.
That we accept this report.
All right, the question has been called. All in favor then of the steering committee report? All in favor signify. Opposed? It is carried. All right, welcome back. In our second hour today, we will continue our consideration of Bill C-19, an act to amend the Criminal Code and the Firearm Act. Appearing before us on this panel is the Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters, Greg Ferrant, Manager, Government Affairs and Policy. From the Canadian Labour Congress, Barbara Byers, Executive Vice President, and Vicki Smallman, National Director of the CLC Women's and Human Rights Department. Appearing as individuals, we have Sergeant Murray Grismer of the Saskatoon Police Service. He is Master Instructor for the Canadian Firearms Safety Courses. And criminal defense lawyer Solomon Friedman. He is from Ontario and created and maintains the firearmslaw.ca blog, a legal resource site devoted to Canadian firearms law and policy. I invite each one of you to make a brief opening statement. We're going to try to hold these statements to about 7-8 minutes if possible, and then we'll get as many questions in likewise as possible. So welcome to Public Safety National Security Committee, and we look forward to your input to this important work that we're conducting. Perhaps I'll begin with Ms. Byers.
Okay. Thank you very much. And on behalf of the 3.2 million members of the Canadian Labour Congress, we want to thank you for this opportunity to be here. As you know from previous appearances, we represent Canada's national and international unions, along with provincial and territorial federations of labour and 130 district labour councils. Our members work in virtually all sectors of the Canadian economy, in all occupations, in all parts of Canada. The CLC opposes C-19 and urges the Standing Committee to ensure the Long Gun Registry is maintained. We support the Long Gun Registry as an effective tool for workplace and community safety. Eliminating it will put workers and Canadians at risk. Our brief to you outlines some of the legislative and political context, and in the interest of time, I'm not going to repeat all of that. I think that you're aware of certainly some of the background. As we stated 15 years ago to the Parliamentary Committee of that day, there are compelling arguments in favour of a gun registry to ensure safe storage requirements, to ensure that gun owners are held accountable for the guns they purchase, to compel gun owners to report missing or stolen firearms, to reduce the illegal trade in rifles and shotguns, to give the police and first responders modern tools to take preventative action, and to trace back stolen guns to their rightful owners. After a decade of use, we've seen crimes solved and criminal prosecutions because of the registry. For example, 2 people were convicted as accessories in the 2005 killings of 4 RCMP officers in Mayerthorpe, Alberta, in part because a registered rifle left at the scene was traced back to its owner through the registry. Now, that's a real example of law and order results, and that's going after the bad guys. In terms of action on violence against women, the CLC has a long history of support for campaigns to end violence against women. Women's equality is a fundamental component of trade union policy in Canada. For more than 20 years, we have joined with women's organizations to commemorate December 6th and to propose actions to reduce violence against women. Our support of the gun registry has always included an understanding of its importance as a tool to help reduce violence against women. It was the massacre of 14 young women at the L'École Polytechnique on December 6, 1989, that prompted the creation of a federal gun registry. Gun violence is one very dangerous component of the issue of violence against women. More women are killed by intimate partners than by strangers. 65% of women are murdered by intimate partners compared to 15% of men. Most are killed in their homes. In 1991, before the first restrictions were introduced, 1/3 of women who were murdered were killed with guns, and the guns used, 88% of them, were long guns. A study conducted between 2005 and 2007 on rural domestic violence in Prince Edward Island and New Brunswick showed 66% of women interviewed felt having a firearm in their home made them fearful for their safety. Since the Firearms Act was introduced, the rate of women murdered with firearms by their intimate partner has decreased by 69%. That's not just making women feel safe, it's helping them be safe. There's no question that the gun registry has helped save women's lives. This government has said that one of its priorities is to reduce violence against women, yet this legislation will have the opposite effect, putting women's lives at risk. Rifles and shotguns are the guns most available in people's homes. They are the guns most often used to kill police officers. Rifles and shotguns are the guns most often used in suicides, particularly those involving youth. In communities where there is high gun ownership rates, you see higher youth suicide rates. However, since the gun registry and its related requirements for safe storage of guns were introduced, youth suicide rates of firearms has declined in relation to suicide rates by other means. Also, because rifles and shotguns are the firearms that are most readily available, they also figure prominently in workplace violence involving guns. In 1999, a devastating incident of workplace violence occurred right here in Ottawa at the OC Transpo bus yard on St. Laurent Boulevard. Those murders were committed by a gunman with a high-powered hunting rifle. Increasingly, as we learn more about the challenges of maintaining healthy and safe workplaces, we are paying more attention to the importance of understanding the risk factors associated with both suicide and interpersonal violence. The risk factors for suicide and violence are closely linked. Access to a firearm, coupled with a personal crisis or a job crisis, is a lethal combination. We need to promote more awareness of the real risks associated with any firearm in the hands of a depressed or stressed individual. And we need to ensure that police, who are the first responders to these types of situations, know as much about the situation as possible, including what kind of gun is involved. Everyone on this committee knows how useful the registry is to our nation's police forces and first responders. The registry provides police with vital knowledge of the number of guns and, more importantly, the type of guns owned. That vital knowledge allows them to assess risks to themselves and to others, and to remove guns from homes and situations where they and the public are at risk. It lets firefighters know when guns and ammunition are likely to be stored on a property, a life-saving piece of information when you're about to enter a burning building. For law enforcement, firefighters, emergency personnel, and social workers, like I was, information about potential risks is crucial in ensuring their safety on the job. Like any worker, they have a right to a safe workplace. But not by denying them access to information about the possibility of guns in a home, this legislation puts their safety at risk. Destroying the data. This is the real boondoggle. Most of the costs associated with setting up the registry were spent a long, long time ago and will never be recovered. The taxpayers of Canada will never get their money back. The annual cost to maintain the registry today is cost-effective for the job it does, and even more efficient given it no longer receives a revenue stream from license renewals. Most of the costs frequently associated with the registry by its opponents are in fact costs related to licensing, including background criminal checks of applicants. Over 7.4 million guns are registered to date, with long guns.
Yeah, we're coming to the end. We're actually over our time. If you wouldn't mind just kind of drawing everything very quickly to a close.
I'll just point out a couple of things, is that first off, the database is consulted over 17,000 times a day by police across the country. We know that, and it can't be dismissed. The proposal to throw out the data is absolutely taking the lives of people at risk, not just in their communities, but in their workplaces. And for many people, the workplaces are other people's homes. Our taxes have been spent with the registry. We believe that we need to keep the registry, and we need to make sure that people's lives and communities and workplaces are safe. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll maybe now just move down the line here. Mr. Ferrand, welcome, and we look forward to your comments.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, and my fellow panelists. On behalf of the Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters, one of the oldest and largest non-profit conservation-based organizations in Canada, we appreciate this opportunity to appear before you today to comment on Bill C-19. Although we've provided the clerk a longer written presentation, it will not meet the 7-minute test, so I'll use my time to hone in on a few specific issues referred to in that document. As I noted during my appearance before this committee last year in support of Ms. Hepner's private member's legislation, Bill C-68, as has been noted by Ms. Byers, was born partly out of tragedy attributable to public concerns in the aftermath of the horrific 1989 shooting at École Polytechnique. There's no doubt the impact of that event on the families of the victims and the victims who survived cannot be underestimated or understood by those of us who have not experienced such loss. However, that loss cannot be used to justify a system that has been an abysmal failure, and we strongly support the fact that the Harper government has moved quickly to introduce a bill to address this issue. When C-68 was created, the Coalition for Gun Control attempted to explain the need for this registry and other components in the bill, and I quote, "The argument for gun control has never been based on individual cases. It's always been based on the general principle that if you have adequate control of all guns, you reduce the chances that dangerous people will gain access to them," unquote. At best, the Coalition was being disingenuous. The entire debate over gun control and the creation of a long gun registry under C-68 was, in fact, a direct result of the misguided actions of one lone individual. Prior to that, gun control in Canada was not a major public policy issue, and the creation of a regime to regulate legal firearms, particularly non-restricted long guns, as a means of protecting the public from individuals with a grudge was flawed from the start. A paper trail of trained, legal, licensed firearm owners does not address the real problem. Even a well-run registry, which this is not, will not prevent random violent crime. Believing in that ignores the glaring reality that the vast majority of criminals don't register firearms, and in the rare case when they do, a piece of paper and creation of a system where possibly 50% of the firearms in Canada are not included does nothing to anticipate the actions of an individual, nor does it do anything to prevent such actions in the first place. It also ignores the fact that police in this country have noted repeatedly that anywhere from 70 to 90% of illegal guns in Canada are smuggled in from south of the border. Despite this, we hear little from gun control advocates about the need to address this serious problem, which is indeed directly linked to dangerous people gaining access to them. The OFAH represents a large number of hunters and recreational sports shooters in Ontario, responsible firearms owners who believe in effective gun control. In the early 1960s, we called upon the province of the provincial government of the day to create a formal structure for the delivery of hunter education. For more than 26 years, we have delivered some form of hunter education on behalf of the provincial government, and since 1998 have done so under formal agreement. The success of that program is readily apparent. 310 hunter education instructors, most of whom are also firearm safety instructors, have trained over 170,000 first-time hunters. The program has an admirable safety record, as do the majority of responsible firearms owners in this country, who understand how to use them safely, how to store them safely, how to transport them safely, and use them precisely for what they are intended for, recreational shooting and hunting. As a conservation-based organization, the OFAH is involved in a vast number of conservation-based programs which are based on the best available science. Science relies on fact. Scientific theory is tested, and if the facts are found wanting, it's rejected and the search continues for a rational explanation. In the case of the long gun registry, there's a glaring absence of fact-based evidence to support its existence. Suggestions that gun crime in Canada has declined since the introduction of the long gun registry under Bill C-68 ignores the fact that gun crime, particularly gun crime using long guns, has been on the decline in this country since 1970s, 2 decades before this registry ever came into being. Crimes committed with long guns have fallen steadily since 1981. C-68 was not introduced until 1995 and wasn't mandatory until 2005. Noted academics like Rosemary Gartner of the University of Toronto have recently commented that experts had difficulties in accounting for the decrease, and Dr. Ron Melchers, professor of criminology right here at University of Ottawa, recently stated that the decline cannot be attributed to Canada's gun registry. Believing that something works without evidentiary material to support that belief is nothing more than supposition and conjecture. The present system focuses all of its efforts on law-abiding firearms owners and includes no provisions for the tracking of prohibited offenders who are most likely to commit gun crime. Witness the recent arrest of an individual in Newfoundland for gun crimes, only to find out this same person's been under a prohibition order for 10 years. This should be about who should not have guns rather than who does. We strongly support the creation of a prohibited persons registry to focus on real, not perceived threats to public safety. Another prominent argument we've already heard here today is how many times a day the system is used by police. Some say 9,000, some say 5,000. We've recently seen 14,000, 17,000, and Liberal leader Bob Rae suggested 11,000. The vast majority of so-called hits on the registry have little or nothing to do with gun crime. The majority of these are a case where an officer maybe stops a vehicle for a plate identification or an address identification, which touches automatically all databases, including the long gun registry, despite the fact the check had nothing to do with firearms in the first place. The Canadian Labour Congress, with all due respect to my colleagues here on the panel today, suggests that social workers, paramedics, firefighters, and other first responders use the information to keep them safe on the job. These groups and individuals do not have access to the database, so unless the CLC is suggesting that each and every time a social worker, a firefighter, or a paramedic responds to a call, they first contact police and have the database queried specifically to determine if firearms may be present, it's difficult to understand how this happens. In fact, for police to share the information on the database may well be a breach of privacy. Over the last few years, public support for the registry has eroded. While this confidence has waned, the level of rhetoric from supporters of the registry has increased exponentially. This has resulted in increased unfounded generalizations devoid of factual evidence. For instance, on second reading of Bill C-19, official members of the opposition who voted with the government were punished. The irony of this is not lost upon us, nor the discrediting of these two members, which is interesting given that when C-68 was created, 8 of 9 NDP members at the time voted against the bill, which they so vigorously defend today. Recently, some media sources, members of the official opposition, members of the third party, and registry apologists have suggested that the introduction of C-19 will do various things, such as scrapping the registry will involve delisting various guns and sniper rifles, that lawlessness will rule the day, that solving gun crimes will end because police will have no more tools at their disposal, and that this is a conservative plot to undermine a liberally created program.
Mr. Parent, could we, again, our time is
I will be quick as I can, Mr. Chair. I appreciate
just conclude.
The facts do not support that. The bill has nothing to do with delisting anything. Other components, as you've heard today, remain in place. Police, like Ontario OPP Inspector Ed Medved, have said losing the registry is not going to shut us down. There are innumerable registration databases across this country, and I could list them all for you if I had time, which are still in use by police. And when the bill was created, 5 provinces challenged the constitutionality of it, including 3 Liberal governments, undermining the partisan argument.
Thank you, Mr. Parent. Well, I'll have to leave it there. Maybe you can
Sure.
implement some of the other information and questions that will be asked.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Friedman, please.
Mr. Chair, Vice Chairs, honorable members, good afternoon. My name is Solomon Friedman. I'm a criminal defense lawyer in private practice with the Ottawa firm of Edelson Clifford DeAngelo LLP. Although I maintain a comprehensive criminal law practice, I specialize in defending individuals charged with firearms offenses. My clients and I, as their counsel, experience on a regular basis the onerous and deleterious effects of the long gun registry. Now, you will no doubt hear in the coming days and weeks from various interest groups about how the long gun registry is a minor inconvenience, merely a matter of paperwork. We register our dogs, our cats, and our cars, they say. Why not register our shotguns and rifles as well? As you know, the registration scheme for non-restricted long guns and for prohibited and restricted firearms as well is enacted as federal legislation under the Criminal Code and the Firearms Act. The Supreme Court of Canada, in the Firearms Act reference, held that the Firearms Act is valid federal legislation because it is enacted pursuant to the federal criminal law power. Indeed, this very aspect of the Firearms Act, which makes it valid federal legislation, ensures that those who fail to comply, out of inadvertence or otherwise, are punished harshly and in many cases unjustly. With the criminal law power comes criminal law procedure and, most importantly for the nearly 2 million law-abiding licensed gun owners in Canada, criminal law penalties. Unlike a failure to register a pet or a motor vehicle, any violation of the firearms registration scheme, even the mislaying of paperwork, carries with it the most severe consequences: a criminal charge, a potential criminal record, detention, and sometimes incarceration. hardly comparable to the ticket under the Provincial Offences Act or the Highway Traffic Act that goes along with the failure to register a vehicle. In addition, registry violations are often grounds for colorable attempts on the part of police, the Crown, and the Chief Firearms Officer to confiscate firearms and revoke lawfully obtained gun licenses. As Defence Counsel, I have seen time and time again alleged long gun registry violations used as a pretext to detain individuals, search their belongings in their homes, and secure evidence to lay additional charges. It is absurd to think that through the requirement to register long guns and possess and carry registration certificates, it is the law-abiding citizen who is subject to greater police scrutiny than the unlicensed individual, who is truly in unlawful possession of a firearm. Next, the long gun registry is simply one more layer of paperwork and complexity in a system of firearms regulation that is already overwrought with process and procedure. I have 2 law degrees. I clerked at the Supreme Court of Canada, and I practice criminal law for a living. And even I, at times, find the provisions of the Firearm Act and the gun control portions of the Criminal Code convoluted, complex, and confusing. The long gun registry is simply one more trap for the unwary, a stumbling block for the blind. Parliament ought not to be in the business of transforming licensed, law-abiding, responsible citizens into criminals, especially not for paper crimes. Should this piece of paper really determine the difference between lawful possession of a rifle or shotgun and an illegal act punishable by criminal sanction? I am certain that you will hear about the symbolism of the long gun registry. Enacted as a knee-jerk reaction in the aftermath of tragedy, the gun registry, like much of the current gun control scheme, was seen as a tribute to individuals who lost their lives at the hands of gun-wielding madmen. Honourable members, I can tell you firsthand, from my vantage point in courtrooms across Eastern Ontario, laws make terrible memorials. They fail to honour the dead and instead punish only the living, in this case, the law-abiding and responsible. In fact, I hope that Bill C-19, the repealing of the long gun registry, will itself be a symbol. It will be symbolic to millions of licensed gun owners and stand for the proposition that the government will no longer punish the law-abiding for the acts of the lawless. I hope, and I know many of my clients share this hope, that Bill C-19 will serve as a memorial of sorts, a tombstone marking the final resting place of wrong-headed policymaking. There are millions of Canadian gun owners who will be glad to know that in the halls of Parliament Hill, hysteria and hyperbole no longer trump reason, facts, and empirical evidence. The long gun registry has been used as a means to target licensed gun owners for too long. I urge you to pass Bill C-19 without amendment and end it. Honourable members, long guns are tools used lawfully and peaceably by Canadians countless times a day without incident. Responsible citizens do not cease to act responsibly merely due to the presence of tools. Similarly, the registration of firearms, aside from having no discernible impact on crime or public safety, has merely alienated law-abiding firearms owners and driven a deep wedge between gun owners and law enforcement. Gun owners have long been the whipping boy of Canadian politics. I hope that this bill symbolizes a change in attitude by our parliamentarians. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Friedman. And we'll now move to Mr. Grismer, please.
Mr. Chairman, honourable committee members and fellow witnesses, it's an honour and a privilege for me to appear before you today to assist you in your deliberations regarding Bill C-19. I'm a sergeant with the Saskatoon Police Service with almost 25 years of service protecting the citizens of Saskatoon and Saskatchewan. I supervise a team of 10 constables, frontline men and women responsible for policing the second largest geographic area in the city of Saskatoon. The courts of Saskatchewan have qualified me as an expert witness, enabling me to give opinion evidence on firearms. In that capacity, I've provided assistance in over 50 cases to both federal and provincial prosecutions. I'm a master instructor for both Canadian firearm safety courses and improved verifier certified by the Registrar of the Canadian Firearms Registry. I want to make it clear from the onset, my comments here today are mine and mine alone. They do not reflect the opinion or opinions of my employer, Chief of Police, or Police Service. That said, I am the appointed spokesperson for the Saskatoon Police Association on the Firearms Act and the Firearms Registry. Further, until the fall of 2002, I was a spokesperson for the Saskatchewan Federation of Police Officers on the issues of the Firearms Act and the Firearms Registry. I understand this august committee will have opportunity to hear from other police officers who share my belief the registry for non-restricted rifles and shotguns, commonly referred to as long guns, should be abolished. Thousands of police officers across Canada, who are, in my opinion, the silent or silenced majority, also share this position. To say the police community is divided on support of the registry is an understatement. When the Canadian Police Association initially endorsed the registry, they adopted their position without having ever formally polled their membership. The CACP's position is not that of the Saskatchewan Federation of Police Officers, nor that of the Saskatoon Police Association. The Saskatchewan Federation is the only provincial police association that polled its entire membership on the issue of the registration of firearms. When polled, the Saskatoon Police Association was 99.46% against the registry, while our compatriots in many of the other Saskatchewan police forces were 100% in opposition to the registry. There are some who would arrogantly or foolishly consider that those who have opinions against the registry are uninformed or uneducated. Nothing could be further from the truth. Instead, we recognize the true cornerstone of public safety is training, screening, and the licensing of owners, not the registration of non-restricted rifles and shotguns. Though the mantra of the former government of the day, CACP and CPA, was gun control is crime control, the registry misses the target of the criminal use of firearms. Instead, it targets millions of lawful, legitimate firearms owners in the name of crime control. The fact is, the registry can do nothing to prevent criminals from obtaining or using firearms. Ecole Polytechnique, Mayerthorpe, Spiritwood, and Dawson College are names synonymous with tragic events involving firearms. However, the Firearms Registry for long guns would not, could not, and did not stop these tragic events. The retention of the Firearms Registry or records will do nothing to prevent any such further occurrence. Training, enhanced screening, and licensing of firearms owners, as we see today, may have prevented the individual in the first instance from being able to obtain a firearm. However, even Canada's strict licensing regime and firearms registry cannot prevent random acts of violence. The best example of this failure is the shooting rampage at Dawson College by Kim Vergill. The CACP contends Canadians continue to support a registry that cost over $2 billion. And in over a decade cannot be shown to have prevented even one death. Unfortunately, public opinion polls do not support their position. The CACP and others will attempt to convince you retention of the registry is an officer safety issue. Further, they will advocate for the retention of records accessible on a database to police investigators if the registry is abolished. To the layperson having little or no knowledge of firearms or the registry, this may appear reasonable. However, once one knows and understands the failing of the registry, the issue of officer safety takes on a far more sinister meaning. For officers using the registry, trusting in the inaccurate, unverified information contained therein, tragedy looms at the next door. The argument to retain the registry for investigative purposes is disingenuous or specious at best. Once the registry is abolished, the information contained therein is immediately stale-dated. The evidentiary limited value of such erroneous information deteriorates by the minute as firearms across Canada are acquired, sold, altered, or destroyed. Knowing what I do about the registry, I cannot use any of the information contained in it to swear out a search warrant. To do so would be a criminal act. Thus, I cannot in good conscience tell any officer, junior or senior, to place any faith in the results of a query of the Canadian Firearms Registry. Projections from within the Canadian Firearms Centre privately state it will take 70 years of attrition to eliminate all the errors and have all the firearms currently in Canada registered. This level of inaccuracy is unacceptable for any industry, let alone law enforcement. Police officers deserve better. The public and the courts demand better. If the National DNA Databank or Automated Fingerprint Identification System had the same potential error, the public and the courts would be outraged, and with just cause. Every entry in these databases is empirical, a level of accuracy the registry has not attained. As a team leader for the Olympic Security Force, I had the opportunity to speak with officers from across Canada. the vast majority of officers I spoke with did not support the registry. They do not trust the information it contains and see it as a waste of time and money. Again, I take you back to the issue of officer safety. Police across Canada cannot and must not place their trust or risk their lives on inaccurate, unverified information contained in the registry. From my perspective, if doing away with the registry saves one of Canada's frontline police officers, it is worth it. Retaining the registry at the risk of one police officer's life is too great a price to pay. In closing, I wish to thank you for your attention and leave you with these thoughts. Polls indicate the majority of Canadians want the registry for non-restricted rifles and shotguns abolished. This position, I contend, is supported by a majority of frontline police officers in Canada. Further, this government ran on a platform of ending the long gun registry. The last election represents a referendum on that platform, which Canadians voted in majority to support. Bill C-19 is worthy of your consideration and support, for it brings to an end a registry that represents the largest and most contentious single waste of taxpayer dollars. A registry that is consumed with errors and inaccurate data, a registry that frontline police officers do not trust, use, or support, and more importantly, risks the safety of frontline police officers across Canada. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to thank all our presenters today for presenting their perspectives, and good job done. We'll now move to the government side for 7 minutes, and we'll go to Mr. Leaf, please. 7 minutes.
Mr. Chair, and thank you to all our witnesses here today. This line of questioning will be for Mr. Grismer. We've heard now some conflicting testimony today, and it's indicative of what we've heard throughout the debate on this on the long gun registry itself, and what the communities feel is on this, and maybe you could just clarify this one question I'd have to see if we can bring some resolution to the conflicting information we've got. And speaking as a former conservation officer in the Yukon Territory, an individual who I checked hunters all the time, hundreds and hundreds of firearms in a season, and I never had access to the firearms registry. I never felt that put me at greater risk, because we used universal precautions training that protected us from that, and we didn't have a great deal of faith and reliance in a registry anyway. But the point is we did not have access to that registry. And we heard Ms. Byers indicate that firefighters and social workers did. Mr. Ferrant said that's absolutely inaccurate. Can you give us the facts on that? Do social workers and firefighters have direct access to the registry, or are they able to call the police and just access the registry information?
The registry is a police access database. To the best of my knowledge, firefighters do not have access to it. Paramedics do not have access to it. Neither do social workers have direct access to it. From my experience and my position when I was in professional standards, to divulge any information contained in that database to any person that is unauthorized is a breach of security and forms, in essence, a breach of the Privacy Act for the individual to whom that information represents.
And from being in a rural part of Canada, so to speak, you would be familiar with, I'm sure at some point in your career you've worked with other agencies like Canadian Wildlife Service, conservation officers, fisheries and oceans officers.
I've worked with the CERM officers, the wildlife officers within our jurisdiction. Fisheries and wildlife, I don't, like federal fisheries and wildlife, I don't come into much contact with.
Okay. So when we're talking about officer safety, because this is one of the areas that is really being spread out across the public, and it's unfortunate that we have individuals speaking on behalf of the masses, and I've spoken with numerous frontline police officers, and not to run my resume, but I've also been a member of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and I know that the members I work with daily have no confidence in the registry and don't support it. But let's talk about the safety. And when you're called to a residence, would the absence of firearms or a hit on that registry provide any greater or a measure of safety for an officer?
Universal precautions are used anytime any one of my people go to a residence. I try to get to as many domestic disturbances as I can because I find that the presence of a supervisor there, someone of senior rank, tends to help people out. To the best of my knowledge, I know of no frontline police officer in Saskatoon that queries the registry en route to a call. It's just not anything that happened. Their first priority is to get there. They use precautions in approaching a residence. A hit on that if they were to query that registry, if they were to do that, and if they were to believe in that information saying there was no firearms there, they would be placing themselves at great jeopardy to proceed further if they don't take precautions in approaching that residence. If you go there with the thought process in mind, and that's why I tried to convey that there's no firearms there, you're putting yourself at risk. You are doomed to some kind of terrible tragedy, and we take every precaution. Once we find that there's a firearm there, or if we have any indication that there are firearms there, what we seek to do is cordon off the area to secure it so that we can bring in qualified people from our emergency response team who have the tools and the ability to be able to deal with armed or barricaded individuals.
And in respect to weapons, across the board, which are really the most concerning to frontline police officers?
Handguns.
Handguns.
Handguns and knives.
And knives.
Knives are far more predominant a weapon than rifles, shotguns, and handguns.
And when you're searching a detained or arrested individual, what would you say would be the greatest issue of concern for an officer going hands-on with a detained or arrested individual in terms of weapons or objects that would be a safety issue for officers?
We encounter mostly knives.
Knives.
Because they're secreted on people's persons, and often when they're found in various places. Like some people we've transported into our detention center have had, when they get searched real closely or skin searched in our detention area, we end up finding weapons on them, and generally they're knives, cutting instruments.
And would you say that on a daily basis, just maybe a rough figure, but would street checks, vehicle checks and person checks, street checks as it were, be more frequent than residence-based checks?
Oh, by far.
And would you have immediate and accurate access when you're doing a street check to the registry that would provide greater measure of safety for frontline officers?
We don't do street checks when we're doing a street check of an individual. That's not something that my people do. We query CPIC, and through CPIC, a hit on running somebody's license plate will automatically generate a CPIC query on the individual, and that will bring up if he has wants or warrants, that kind of thing.
Right, and you would do that. I mean, that's an occurrence that would happen thousands of times a day across this country, checking
absolutely
cars.
Yeah.
And how reliable, or would officers ever stop a vehicle and proceed with a check without accessing a registry? And if so, how do they stay safe doing that?
Thank you, Mr. Leaf.
I just have one question of Mr. Leaf.
Yes.
When you say access a registry, what are you talking? What are you
the
asking?
firearms registry.
Well, they don't. What I've tried to get to, the point I tried to get to you is, I speak for my jurisdiction here, is that, I mean, we conduct checks of CPIC and on the individual in running the plate. That may not be the individual in the vehicle. That's just the vehicle. That's just to whom it was registered, and that queries back on them. And then from there on, if an officer feels the need, he can delve deeper into the individual that he's dealing with.
Thank you, Mr. Grismer. We'll now move to the official opposition. Mr. Harris, please, 7 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all of the presenters here today. It was most interesting to hear the various views. If I may ask Sergeant Grismer, please, first of all, I take it when you were certified as an expert in firearms and dealing with prosecutions in the Saskatchewan court, it was in relation to the operation of firearms or training. You weren't chosen as you weren't certified as an expert in firearms control and registration policies, and that sort of was related to ballistics or the use of firearms in a particular criminal act. Is that correct?
In being qualified by the courts, the courts have given me a very broad latitude. In addition to the operation and classification of firearms, I also provide the Crown with opinion on particular aspects of the law and which things would apply to the particular case that's at bar.
Yeah, so not in terms of policy. So, for example, when you say in your paper that you gave us that the fact is that the registry can do nothing to prevent the criminals from obtaining or using firearms, that's not part of your expertise in terms of your opinion that you would offer to a court, for example.
That's true. I've not been qualified by the court with it. That comes from 25 years of being on the street as a frontline police officer and as a person who worked in major crimes for a period of time.
Okay. So I take it then from that statement and your comment that you would disagree with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police firearms program evaluation when they say that without registration there is a failure of accountability on behalf of the owner, and it's registration that drives accountability. Without registration, anyone can buy and sell firearms privately and there will be no record. So you disagree with that in your opinion, that is a false statement, that's not accurate based on your experience.
I disagree with their statement.
Okay, thank you. They also say registration further helps to reduce the general proliferation of firearms. This is very useful in investigating licensed owners in the trafficking of firearms to unlicensed owners. Without a registry, it becomes almost unenforceable. And you disagree with that?
I submit, sir, that there are other tools by which to do that.
And when they say firearms registration is a critical component of the entire firearms program, you disagree with that as well?
I do. I believe that, in my presentation, I stated that training, screening, and licensing of owners is the cornerstone of it.
Yes, and I wanted to get to that, actually. So the training, screening, and licensing is the cornerstone of it. But as a police officer, wouldn't you be concerned about the proliferation of firearms? Wouldn't you be concerned about the smuggling of firearms? Wouldn't you be concerned about all sorts of firearms in use throughout the country? Aren't they an enforcement of that? Wouldn't that be a cornerstone of public safety when it comes to firearms? Training is for those who seek it. You know, licensing is also for those who seek it, and public education these are useful. But if you're saying you ignore all of the other aspects of enforcement and proliferation, you know, the present legislation, and I'm assuming that you read it, says that a person may transfer a firearm that's neither prohibited nor restricted if the transferee holds a license. But there's no mechanism for enforcement of that. In fact, if one actually voluntarily goes to the registrar to see whether there's any particular issues with respect to the licensee, proposed licensee, there's a provision that says that neither the registrar nor his delegate nor a designated person shall retain any record of a request made under subsection 1. So it seems that this legislation is designed to ensure that firearms can be transferred without being traced, without being tracked. They can go anywhere, even though there's a voluntary requirement here. There's no mechanism to enforce it, and we're talking about the ability for unrestricted and not prohibited firearms, including semi-automatics and sawed-off shotguns. I want to correct including sawed-off shotguns that are manufactured as sawed-off shotguns. In other words, not manufactured big and cut short. These can proliferate without any restriction whatsoever. In your opinion, that's okay, because licensing and training and public education are really all that's necessary.
Well, I want to take you back to the first part of your dissertation. You talked about the firearms and trafficking and firearms being smuggled. The firearms that are being smuggled into this country from the United States firearms being smuggled into Canada from the United States are not long guns, rifles, and shotguns. The firearms that are being smuggled into Canada are handguns. The gangster on the street doesn't want a big, unwieldy firearm. He wants something small, something he can hide, and it becomes a status symbol to him to have that in his possession. Those firearms, sir, are restricted as, and have been restricted since 1934. And we still see a huge proliferation of them on our streets. We still do drug raids and find unregistered handguns, firearms that have been smuggled into this country from the United States. We're not finding rifles and shotguns smuggled in. It's not what the underworld, the gang underworld, use. If I run into firearms, by far handguns or prohibited weapons are what I encounter. Things that have been sawed off and chopped up, and some very crudely done. So, do I think that the registry is going to stop any of that stuff? No. Do I think that the registry of long guns will stop any of that? Absolutely not.
Jack, you've got
Done?
5 seconds. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much. We'll now move to Ms. Hepner, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I just have a few minutes, so I'm going to try to go rather quickly. Mr. Friedman, I'm wondering if you could comment on a previous testimony during Bill C-391, which will be part of this study. We heard that certain studies have shown that if you're a licensed gun owner, you're actually 50% less likely to commit a homicide or a gun crime. Because, by and large, that means you are a law-abiding individual who complies with rules and regulations as they are established. We heard a testimony from Mr. Grismer that the best way to prevent gun crime is, I think you talked about education, training, and licensing. Again, all of which, as even Mr. Harris acknowledged, would be complied with by somebody who had agreed to be trained, to be educated, and to get a license, as well as those would be individuals who would agree to register their firearms. All of this has to do with compliance, people who are complying with the laws. Mr. Friedman, approximately a year and a half ago, the Toronto Police Department did a sweep of the city, and they looked at who had a license, who had a registration. They ended up spreading out, I think, about 1,500 long guns on a table, saying, look at all the guns we got off the street. When I asked them, did you arrest one drug dealer, one domestic violent person, one person who was involved in gang activity, did you make any arrests for any criminal activity? The answer was no. Can you explain, Mr. Friedman, who was being targeted and what kind of effect that had on law-abiding gun owners in Canada?
Absolutely. I think the very first point you raised is the answer to your question, which is we already have a wonderful database in this country of law-abiding citizens. It is the firearms licensing system. That is, those individuals are pre-approved through rigorous background checks. In fact, if I were to compare the screening I underwent to obtain a secret security clearance for the Government of Canada with the screening that a law-abiding firearm owner goes through to obtain a possession and acquisition license, without a doubt, the license screening is far more rigorous. We have a list of individuals who have been pre-cleared as law-abiding individuals, law-abiding citizens, legitimate gun users. They are not the ones who are trafficking in firearms. They are not the ones who are smuggling firearms. And we talk about the abolition of the registry perhaps allowing firearms owners to transfer their firearms without record. These are individuals who have already been pre-qualified by the Government of Canada as law-abiding citizens. They are not the ones who have anything to do with the proliferation of illegal firearms into this country. The answer, of course, as you alluded to, is drug dealers, individuals with lengthy criminal records that would make them ineligible for a firearms license, and in many cases, individuals with outright firearms prohibitions imposed by our courts, meaning that under no circumstances could they lawfully possess a firearm, could they transfer one legitimately, or could they obtain a license. That has absolutely nothing to do with the registry. The registry targets one group and one group alone, and that's law-abiding firearms owners.
Thank you very much. Sergeant Grismer, I want to ask you again in regards to the police using the registry or not using it because it's so unreliable. You referred very briefly to our current fingerprint database as well as our DNA database and the reliability of that both of those databases as compared to the long gun registry. Can you please explain a little further if we do truly depend on it, if you can get warrants based on the fingerprint database or DNA database, and why you can't get a warrant based on the long gun registry database? That's a huge, huge gap.
My presentation says I cannot and will not swear out a warrant based on the information contained in it. In order for me to be able to swear out information in order to obtain a search warrant, I have to swear before a judge or justice that I verily believe the information contained in it to be true. If I include anything in there from the firearms registry, I can't do that. That would be a false declaration. I can't do that because I know of the errors. I know of the millions, that there's in excess of 1 million guns and other firearms in Canada that aren't in the registry. I know of the tens of thousands of firearms in the firearms registry that are registered using patent numbers, model numbers, the numbers of firearms in the registry that hold multiple registration certificates. A database that, by all accounts from people from within the registry, say will take 70 years of attrition in order to be anywhere as accurate. I'm not going to swear before a judge, justice, or court that I believe this to be true. I can't do that.
Thank you. Do I have a little more time? Mr. Farrant, I have a question for you. You spoke briefly about something that is very disturbing to me. I think it's very disturbing to all Canadians, and that's the fact that 2 NDP members of Parliament who represented their constituents, who you also represent with your organization in Ontario, because these 2 NDP MPs are from Ontario, were penalized severely by their party for consistently representing their views on this issue. And, you know, their expression was they were never told this was a whipped vote. No one ever went to them and said, here's what the consequences would be. They have been, Bruce Heyer and John Rafferty have consistently stood up for their constituents, and they have now been severely penalized by the NDP, who would rather hear from some union representatives than their own members of Parliament who are representing their party. Can you please explain to us and for, I think for all of us on this panel, what message that sends to the people that you represent in Ontario about how well respected their views are by the NDP?
Yes, thank you very much, Ms. Ebner, for the question. You know, quite clearly, members of Parliament are sent here to represent constituents. They're elected by people locally to come to Ottawa to represent the views of the people in the community in which they reside. The 2 individuals in question have consistently represented the views of our members and the vast majority of legal, law-abiding hunters and recreational sports shooters in the Thunder Bay area. And in the process, they have been told, you're not allowed to do that. You're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to toe the party line. Well, the message that sends back to our members in Thunder Bay, and indeed all legal, law-abiding firearms owners, is when you send somebody to Ottawa to represent your interests, don't count on it if it doesn't fall within the party paradigm. And I think it's a dangerous message to deliver.
Thank you very much. We're going to go to the final question of the day, and we're going to give Mr. Scarpellegio the 7 minutes, please.
Thanks very much. Very interesting testimony obviously from individuals who have a lot of experience and knowledge of this issue. You did quote the Supreme Court, Mr. Friedman, but there's another quote from a case called the Queen versus Wiles. I guess you're familiar with that.
Sorry, what was the
There's
name
another
of the case?
quote from the case of the Queen versus Wiles, where the court says, you know, the possession and use of firearms is and I'm just translating here, a heavily regulated privilege. So I don't think, you know, I don't think we can make a case against the registry based on the fact that gun owners have rights maybe tantamount to what exists in the United States. On that note, I'd like to say that, for the record, that the gun owners I know in my community happen to be the pillars of the community. So we're not impugning gun owners by being in favor of the registry, and I don't think that gun owners should be made, long gun owners should be made to feel like criminals because they have to register their guns. And I believe that governments kind of torqued that rhetoric. Previous governments never suggested that they were criminals, but over time the governments told them, look, you should feel like a criminal if you register your rifle, and then it sort of snowballs from there. But anyway, that's a bit of a tangent. And I understand your point about a gun owner perhaps feeling that he or she's breaking the law because some paper is misplaced or they haven't done their homework properly or whatever it is. But our party recommended decriminalizing the failure to register the first time. Now, I think if you fail to register 2 or 3 times, there might be a problem that needs to be addressed, maybe through the criminal code. So if we decriminalize the need to register the first time, would that not satisfy a lot of people who feel that maybe it's a little heavy-handed?
Thank you very much for the question. The reason I made reference to the Firearms Act reference, the Supreme Court case, is because that's the case in which the validity of the law, in fact, of federal regulation of firearms, was disputed by several provinces. And the way the Supreme Court solved this issue, and it's key to your point, was by saying that the federal government has jurisdiction to regulate personal property, which is otherwise under the jurisdiction of the provincial governments, because it does so using the criminal law power. And in fact, not testifying as a constitutional expert here, but as a criminal defense lawyer, I would question whether or not federal parliament would be allowed to enact simple regulatory provisions regarding private property, such as firearms. The issue of firearms feeling targeted by the federal parliament, being treated as criminals, is why they end up at my door. I'm a criminal defense lawyer, and this is a strong segment of my practice. I wish that segment of my practice would disappear. But the end result is firearms owners are targeted, they're charged, and they're prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. The question of whether or not that could occur by decriminalizing it doesn't take it out of the realm of criminal jurisdiction. Right. And you're telling gun owners, you are governed under the same statute, the criminal code, that governs assault, murder, etc., simply because you've licensed and you have complied voluntarily with a scheme. That's the targeting of gun owners.
Last word, Mr. Scarpaleggia. You get to conclude here for the day.
Well, there were a couple of points made that I'd just like to address. One is that this registry was a reaction to a media story, and that there's no evidence that the registry isn't based on evidence that it is useful. But, we see that a lot in Parliament. I mean, we saw the government introduce anti-smuggling legislation in response to a highly sensationalized story about the arrival of a boat of refugees on the West Coast. And we see the government also, respectfully, constantly harping on minimum sentences when there's no real evidence to suggest that they work. So I'm just for the sake of consistency, I thought I'd mention that, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Scarpaleggia. And I want to thank all members again from this committee, on behalf of this committee, for coming here and for bringing your perspective. We have a number of other meetings. We'll hear from many other witnesses, and we want to thank you for the presentations that you've made today. We are dismissed. We are adjourned.